Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and unbelievably, our winning streak has continued. We're 8 wins from 8 games in 2021. Our winning streak now extends back into the 2020 season, spanning 241 days, and I'm finding it harder and harder just to keep a lid on this juggernaut. What a time to be a Demon fan. Joining us tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George. How are you?
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone. And here on Budget Night, we promise we'll do a far more interesting analysis for our Demonland listeners than what is coming out of Parliament House at the moment.
It's always a topic very close to the heart of old school Demon supporters. So, hopefully we haven't lost half of our audience as a result. Also joining us tonight, B-Man. Good evening, B-Man. How are you? Might have to unmute yourself, B-Man.
I just thought that as soon as I started. Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And Budget Night. I'm very worried about what they'll do to my share prices and my chalet up at Thredbo. So hopefully I'll get my normal tax break that I look for every year.
Well, hopefully there is room in that budget for a training ground for our demons, although as I was talking with George before we went to air, it hasn't not having a training ground or a home hasn't harmed us this year, has it, George?
Not in the slightest. So we might even send them out further next year if we can get similar sorts of results than what we've been getting from training out at Casey all year.
The key question really is, did we have a training ground in 1965?
Well,
The MCG, I'm guessing.
We probably trained on the MCG, and I always think, well, why can't we do that now? And obviously they want to keep the ground in pristine condition, but it would be nice if we could, as the original tenants, train there every now and again.
We absolutely used to train at the MCG. I'm not sure how often, and maybe someone in the chat room might know, but I went to see the D's train a couple of times at the G when Barassi coached. And it was fantastic. You could hear his voice booming from the centre square and them kicking the footies into the stand. I think I even snaffled one.
I wonder when that stopped. I know we went to the junction and trained there for a while, but yeah.
It was when it became a professional operation, when training started in November instead of 3 weeks before the season, and when there was only 2 games played on the MCG on the weekend, and you could afford to have a training session during the week on it. That unfortunately has long gone with the professionalism of the current game.
And there were years I remember. I'm not sure what it was like back in the 60s and 50s, but I remember certainly in the 70s and 80s, the ground used to be a bog for most of the winter. So I guess you can't really train in those conditions. Guys, let's start. We had a very hard-fought, gritty win. We only won one quarter for the night, the second quarter, by 13 points. We lost the first by 2 points, third by 1 point, and the last by 1 point. How were your nerves going into that last quarter, boys? I must say, my MFC SS, and for those listeners who don't know, that's the Melbourne Football Club supporter syndrome, which I guess is the veil of negativity that hangs over many of our supporters, myself included, and my MFCSS was absolutely tingling in that last term. I thought they were going to pinch it from us, and possibly past Melbourne teams would have folded faster than Superman on Laundry Day, as one Demonlander in the post-match thread put it. But I was very nervous, particularly because Sydney have a habit, and I think they've done it 3 times this year where they've pinched games in the last quarter. George, how was your nerves?
Yeah, I think we've better get used to this idea that we unfortunately have become accustomed to over the years of the Demon teams throwing it away when holding sizable advantages. We were 4 goals up nearly, I think, in the third quarter, and then managed to concede a couple of goals to them. And by a few minutes into the final quarter, the difference was down to 3 points again. But the important difference, and we have been talking about this in the last couple of weeks, is maintaining the structure. And there's been a couple of commentaries from observers and other media people about the structures that Melbourne has. And I think we'll hear a little bit later on from Stephen May, who comments on the same thing. It's about not just holding your nerve, but having confidence in your systems. Sydney are a team which play to keep themselves in the game. They shut it down. They block it up. They keep it confined to one half of the ground, and that's exactly what we saw on the weekend. And you've just got to take those little advantages because they depend on someone making a very minor mistake in some cases, and they will just get over the line as a result of keeping themselves in the game. They're never going to kick 25 goals in the game. They're barely going to kick 15, but that's their modus operandi. So while we don't like the idea when they get close, I think we better get used to the fact that this team is capable of just holding themselves in the game and in the contest, and will depend on their structures to get them out.
A few of their goals early on were directly from mistakes from us. Errant handball out, and they get a snap goal. So, yeah, I see what you're saying there. B-Man, your nerves, I'm sure you're more positive than I am. I'm sure you went in thinking, we got this.
Well, I didn't go in thinking necessarily we'd had it. It was all, I thought I'd know whether we were going to win that game 5 minutes into the game, whether our pressure was up. And I thought it was, even after we conceded those first couple of goals. They were both a bit lucky because one was a shank kick to Papley that kicked it forward. And another one was, I think one of the first two goals was after a pretty poor drop mark from Max. Maybe I'm confusing it with a later goal. But when I saw that our pressure was there, I was confident right through to the end, actually. And I guess that's probably indicative of where we're at as a team. It's partly to do with what George is saying is, a system that's reliable and robust and isn't going to get open up. Like the very opposite of what we've got is what Carlton's got at the moment, where you'd be worried about, 5-goal lead, no problems of the opposition coming back. It's struggle to see a team, getting that sort of lead back and smashing us, although they got back into it pretty well, Sydney. So I thought they were fantastic, Swans. I really underestimated them, I have to say. And George, I think they're the highest scoring side coming into that match, actually, this year. They're playing a bit differently to historically how they have, but they really reverted to that game plan that's stood them in such good stead over the last few years, that Longmire and Roos before him have really instilled that, as you say, that flooding and that, fantastic midfield and scrapping. And I thought they did a great job to get the game on their terms and make it frustrating for us to get it on our terms. But it's sort of that thought that you described it a few weeks ago, George, about that sort of slow pressure building. It just seems that we can keep that pressure at a sustained level for a long time. And eventually teams struggle. So it was a bit unusual to sort of watching the game live. There was a really great energy at the G, and I was sitting where I don't normally sit, but down in the forward pocket in the southern stand and looking towards the MCC. The MCC was just rocking. It looked full and people were up and about. So it was a great game to watch from that perspective. But I'm not sure about you fellas, but it always felt as if we were the better team and that they were pushing us, as opposed to, them, even though the scores were level, except for when we got out to about a 22-point margin. It felt as if we were the better team, even when the scores were close, and even in that last quarter. I think they've just, they've become reliable in those clutch moments. And it started last year. I think we won. Of course, we can point to the ones we lost, but we won some close games last year, 3 or 4 close ones, where we were resilient. Even that Carlton game where they came back at us hard at the reset, the second game of the season last year. And we've done it. That's been the theme. We've talked about it a number of times. The theme of this year is we've stood up when challenged, balanced up, and found a way to win. And, I think that's probably the exciting thing, is that we haven't really clicked and played our best football, and you'd have to say, and we're travelling really well.
Let's talk about statistics. But before we do that, if you do want to join us tonight and give us a call, 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. Or join us in the chat room if you're listening live, demonland.com/podcast. And you can ask a question, make a comment. We'll have a look in there and pick some out as we go along. Statistics. We were pretty well beaten in a lot of the key statistics on the night. Centre clearances being the glaring one. We still came away with the 4 points. We got absolutely smashed in centre clearances. We only won 4 and the Swans won 17. Bimman, you've been a big proponent of centre clearances not being the measuring stick for a team's performance. So perhaps you can give your analysis and thoughts on this again for any new or old listeners scratching their heads at this anomaly.
Well, I'll preface my comments by 17-4 is a complete outlier. There's no way of saying that's positive. The positive is that it probably tested our system and our system stood up. Parity level is probably what I suspect their KPI is, whereas, I think that started shifting middle of last year where we started looking at changing that setup, and it's been cemented this year. And I think Uze's had a big role to play with that. It's really evident the different way we've set up. So I suppose in short, my point is that whereas 2 years ago, our key KPIs would have been how many contested ball we win, which is still critical, and clearances, and in particular centre square clearances. So I think, 2 years ago, we were 1 and 2 around that for total clearances, and probably up there the same for centre clearances as well when looking to sort of take advantage of, the best ruckman in the league.
Well, I've got the stats there for the years. 2018, we were the first. 2019, we were second. This is for centre clearances. 2020, we were down to 13th, and 2021, 17th.
Yeah, so that reflects exactly what I'm saying. So it's no longer the key performance indicator. It is that it was, I should say, and that's because essentially, we don't give up that many scores. So it's a sort of matter of risk and reward. 17-4 is a crazy outlier, and Goodwin made that point in his presser about that. It's obviously an issue because. That's a number he said, and he's probably right. That's probably one of the biggest differentials in a game of football since that stat's been recorded. And, it's a crazy, crazy number. And for anyone who's really keen on looking at each of them, Nasher, there's a bit about the centre clearances, and Nasher and A_F both of them went through every single centre clearances and makes fantastic reading. So well played to both of those posters for going to that effort. And the bottom line is that we, on the Demon Stats That Matter on the MFC website, it said that we didn't concede a score from a centre clearances. There's a bit of debate about that on that thread, and it seems to be the consensus. We conceded 1, maybe 2 goals from 17. So really, if you're only conceding 2 from 17, it's not such a problem. But what was really interesting about, but to be clear, you don't want to be losing those sort of differential. If we drop that differential to 6 or 7 against the Dogs, they'll win by 6 or 7 goals. So, I suspect parity level would be around about where they're pegging it. Contested ball still up there. But what was really fascinating about those comments from Goodwin is that he didn't say it was really bad to be down 17-4 in clearance differential because they will score more. He said that that it's bad because it's a problem from a territory perspective. We're a team that's, when you hear them talk about being a territory team, Richmond are the same. What they're meaning by that is we want the ball in our forward half. We will do what we need to do to get territory, which explains why May kicks 40, 50 metres from the point so often rather those dinky little kicks to the corner. We look to go forward now, not across the ground like we did in 2019, for instance. The goal being getting it forward to centre, ideally in the forward half, and trapping it in there. And the problem with losing 17 clearances is not so much from their chances of scoring, which should technically give them more of a chance, but it doesn't because those kicks are dump kicks under pressure. So it's all about the pressure that we can put on that player kicking the ball inside 50. This is a sort of exact reverse of what used to happen to us. So we'd win inside 50s and lose the game for that reason, because our kicks inside 50 would get eaten up by the McGoverns and those sort of intercepting players. The problem is that you start then your territory to win territory from 70, from 100 metres from your goal instead of from 50 metres in the centre. And so it makes it harder to win territory and therefore harder for us to score. And that was really why I think that we struggled to put them away, because we were starting our forward movement, if you like, from the back line instead of from the centre. So it was just made it technically harder to get a winning score. So I think that kept Sydney in the game, not because they were scoring particularly from those set and clearances, but because we were less able to score. So it just simply isn't the sort of the risk that it once was, and it all depends on our ability to put pressure on the ball carrier. They put pressure on the ball carrier, then instead of kicking, the ideal set and clearance is 40, 50 metres deep. So it's 10 metres outside. And so I think, in short, what they've looked to do is to maximise when we do win a clearance, I think the KPI would be how often we score from that centre clearances, and probably drilling down a bit further, how often we get it inside our 50-metre arc and deep, because it's really of no value getting a centre clearance that goes to the half-forward flank and scrabbles around and, or goes, even worse, goes directly to a Lever or a Steve May or a Rivers, who then rebounds it and we get it in our forward line. If you saw the Richmond Cats game, Richmond won the centre clearances in that game, but they were smashed off the half-back flank. And I forget how many goals. It was some crazy number of goals that Cats scored from their back line. And it was purely that. They were just, the ball was going in there and bouncing straight back out and going up the other end. So, it's 7-8-4s. They won't want that. It's about losing territory. But, if we're up around level, they'll be happy, and ideally we score from them when we get a chance.
George, before you take it on, if anyone wants to go on to Demonland to look up those the analysis by Nash and by AF, there is a thread called Centre Clearances considered analysis requested. Put that into the search. I think it's dropped onto the second page. So look that up if you want to, George.
Yeah, that was fantastic analysis, and that's what I was just going to talk a little bit more about. Bin Man hit the nail on the head with a number of the points in there. It's not about clearances as a statistic alone. You've got to look at what type of clearance you get out of this. And if you look at AF and Nash's analysis, Sydney really only had 4 clean clearances out of the middle, and Melbourne had 2, one of which Harms managed to stuff up by running too far. But 4-1 in that case is far better than 17-4 as it appears. It's the quality of the clearances that come out of the middle. It's a bit like looking at statistics alone for ruck hit-outs to advantage are the real things that matter. So clearances on their own don't necessarily mean anything. We were lucky, as Bin Man pointed out, if we do this against the Dogs or Richmond or Geelong, we will get crushed. Sydney don't have marking forwards. Franklin hasn't marked over his head for years, and Sinclair was their resting ruck who can't mark at the best of times. If you put a pair like Kennedy and Darling in there, they'll have an absolute field day with a 17-4 differential coming out of the middle, no matter how scrubby the kicks are. The other interesting thing was that was out of the centre. It's more important to look at what was happening in the rest of the game.
Exactly.
Our total clearances, we were down only 37-39. And more importantly, the stoppage clearances, we were 33-22 in our favour. So while we were losing in the middle, but not giving them any value out of the middle, we were doing the damage around the ground. So that was far more important to us, I think, in the overall outcomes of the game.
I was watching them before the game. You know how they go into the centre and they, have one of the umpires ball up the ball, and they have a couple of guys in a yellow vest and whatever and do some practicing. They then moved to the boundary line and did the same thing, practicing some boundary things. And I'd noticed that they were using Harms to sort of block someone. And so that was probably more effective, the blocking of the opposition from, stoppages around the ground, whereas probably isn't working as well because we're probably trying to get the first ball use out of the middle rather than try to block anyone. But obviously around the ground, we've got a different tactic. B-Man, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of touches on or relates to the point that we've been talking about the last few weeks and last week about, I guess, my frustrations around this, the way the game's talked about by people who are paid to talk about it, and so that centre clearance stat was important 2 or 3 years ago. You could see how important we made it as a footy club by being those numbers reflected. What was it in 2018? We were number one.
Yeah, 1 and 20.
Yeah, I mean, and so back then it was a relevant stat to how you could look at that and judge Melbourne's game, an individual game, whether we were up or down on that stat, because we obviously made it one of our important indicators of success. But it isn't anymore. But the conversation hasn't kept up with in the media, and it's their job to be educating people. Then it wouldn't be the same. Really, I don't quite know why people get fussed about it, because we've won 8 straight, despite it not, we're being, 13th or 14th, you just said, in terms of setting clearances. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. And it's a bit about semantics, I think, because, they talk about winning a clearance that's under pressure, that you're forced to kick a mungle, scrubby kick that's only shallow, only gets to the 60-metre mark, that gets picked up off by a defender and goes straight down the other end. That's not really winning. I mean, but, if you get someone like an Oliver getting the ball in space, perhaps, you could see we've done quite a few of those high-risk multiple handballs in close to get it out to that wide player. And then, and often if they're not on, which was the case, it was actually really slippery on Saturday. And I think on telly, you wouldn't have seen it, but there was a misty rain through much of that game that meant that it was super slippery. And we gave up a few of those handballs in the centre that they cleared. But if you do get one of those players into space and you get an Oliver or a Salem or a Nibbler coming off the half-back line at pace, hitting that pace at pack, and they've got time to balance up, take a few steps, they then kick. They kick deep into a Brown who's 20 metres out from goal. And then if Brown doesn't mark it, it hits the ground, and Cozzy and Nibbler and Spargo and others come in and trap that ball, and then game on for us. When how everyone presses up and the opposition, exactly in that Hawthorn game in that last quarter, they could not, and Richmond as well, they could not get it out of our forward half, and that's what that sort of territory is all about. And that starts by getting a kick deep, but it's no good if it's kicked out to the wing, because they've got plenty of options to move it away from our forward line. So, I think that it's part of the lag between people's understanding of the game, and it's not a critique. It's because the special comments people who are paid to do this stuff and explain it to people don't bother doing it. They don't know themselves half the time. That's hence the questions in the presser about it.
Also, in those years where we were winning centre clearances convincingly, being first and second, our connection into the forward line was just terrible. We weren't able to hit up anyone. The ball was just coming straight, and the pressure of keeping it back in, the ball was just getting leaked out every time. Conversely, in the back line, our defence isn't as it is now, which is rock solid.
But that's true. But part of the reason that's true is because so many of our kicks inside 50 used to be under pressure, and still are, of course. Like George makes the point that, a lot of the centres, they're always going to be random. So they're not like, it's very rare you get a nice clean exit from from a centre clearance and, that beautiful one play thing. But so many of our kicks, people on Demon Land, people were going on and on about it last year with good reason, because so often we'd win the ball in tight where the ball up was 2 or 3 players at the contest. Sure, would win it, but they'd be sweating. The opposition would just sweat on the player on the outside ring, who, when they did get the handball from a Petracca or an Oliver or Viney, who won the ball at the coalface, handballed it out to the outside player, who was immediately tackled. And if they could get a kick away, it was a dump kick into our back line, so that forward entry, yes, it wasn't great, but part of that was because the people kicking the ball were always under pressure. And you can see that a few commentators and made the point how far Oliver is standing from the centre square now, from the centre circle when it's bounced. and not explaining why. Well, that's part of the new structure, because when he hits the ball at speed, he's going to be hard to stop, and he's moving, and he's been a much more damaging player because he's getting much more metres gained. I suspect his metres gained well up this year because of that. And we've scored a few of them. I mean, if you think to the Richmond game, that goal that T-Mac kicked came from exactly that play where it was a couple of handballs out, Max wins the tap, we win a contested ball, couple of quick handballs, it gets out to Salem, and Salem's in space, and from just inside the square kicks it 55 metres to a one out for McDonald, who goes back and kick it. That's what we're looking for, and that's what George's point is exactly right. It's not about whether you win them or not. It's what happens after you win them. Do you win them and then it becomes a penalty for you because the opposition get control of the ball and take it down their end, or do you win it and you get it deep and set up gold standard is setting up a scoring chain, or a scoring opportunity, and after that it's being an opportunity to trap it deep in our forward line.
What are we seeing in the chat room has said we need Viney back in the centre. Do you think having that big bull to be that sort of protection, strong, big-bodied protection to the Olivers and Petrarca is going to make a huge difference?
I think not so much. Yes, not so much from him being a bull, more from the fact that he is the best defensive mid that we've got. Track, that was interesting, George, as you pointed out, the sort of analysis of A_F and Nasher is, the critique on Track is he's often a bit flat-footed and defensively not that strong, but he's set up to be the player who gets the ball and puts it inside 50. So's Oliver, the way they're setting it up, and that leaves Viney to be the defensive. If they do win it, to put mega pressure on them. So I suspect if Viney was playing in that game, it wouldn't have been 17-4. It might have been 12-7 because of his ability defensively, tackle, not just tackle and stop the ball moving to the next player. We had Harms in there, who I thought, we'll talk about him no doubt, but Harms played really well, but he's not as good a defensive mid as Viney. And Jordan spent time in the middle too, didn't he? And but again, he's not as good defensively as Viney. So I think we really did miss him, and it was really evident. It was evident against North, but it was more evident in this game. And it should be remembered, they've got a really quality midfield. That's the other thing that shouldn't be forgotten. Parker, Kennedy, and Mills is now playing in there, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, that's great.
That's an impressive group of players, particularly Parker and Kennedy. They're stars, both of them.
And they've always had a bit of the wood on us as well in past encounters. Let's talk some individual performances. We'll start with the midfield, and Clayton Oliver would have been in strife without his output. 35 possessions, 19 contested, 10 clearances around the ground, 5 tackles, 4 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, and that 534 metres gained that you're talking about, B-Man. Perhaps a shining light in the midfield that was perhaps, as we mentioned, overshadowed by their counterparts. George.
Yeah, Clayton Oliver, what more can you say? I think I heard one of the commentators post-match talking about his game and said the game, as Bin-Man said before, there was a light mist drizzle for a good portion of the game, and the ground was quite slippery. That was the case for everybody else but Clayton Oliver. He just doesn't fumble the ball. We saw plenty of fumbles at critical times from other players during the match, but not Clayton. It's also interesting, Binman's pointed out how he stands off the contest, particularly at the middle. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that everybody's woken up, if they haven't done so already, to the fact that Clayton Oliver is critical to our game plan, and there's putting taggers on him, and he's getting a heavy tag. The advantage of standing away at the centre, and I think he's doing the same thing around the stoppages of the ground, not being in close, is that not only does it create an open space in front of him, but it gives him options to get rid of the tagger. The tagger doesn't know whether he's going to go left or right. If he's in tight, which he used to be, it was pretty easy to cover him because there's nowhere else to go. Now the tagger doesn't know which way he's going to go. So we're starting to see Clayton playing a different type of game, but more damaging in the way that he's playing. It's just fantastic. We've just become accustomed to him getting 35 possessions every week. It's a wonderful position for us to be in.
And damaging's the key word. He's so much more damaging this year, isn't he, George? He's he's a weapon now that, if he got 35 possessions, it'd be like Salem. A fair chunk of them would be those little flippy handballs that he's still brilliant at. But he's getting meters gained, but also really getting the ball in deep in dangerous spots. And maybe I'm imagining it, but he seems to have built a better synergy with Max in terms of roving around the ground off Max's ruck work, and I wonder whether that's partly to do with, as you say, he's moving from further away at those contests, and when he hits the contest, he's really hitting it at speed. It doesn't matter if he's got a tagger, because he's just going to track as well. He's just going to run through them, isn't he? And he's looking to kick it long, and I think his kicking's improved. He seems to be getting more penetration, less sort of floaty helicopter. He's really gone to that level now that I'd hoped he would, and he's always been a star. And it is really the sort of next step up for him, is to be consistently damaging, and he's got there. The one thing that I would love to see, and to be honest, I think track as well, is both of them need to take the chances when they've got an opportunity to kick a goal. Neither gives me any confidence when they're shooting. If he can start getting a goal a game or goal every couple of games, he's going to go up to that really rare sort of level.
What did you guys make of James Harm's return to the team? George, in your match report of the game, you called his addition to the team questionable, despite him finishing with 31 touches and 21 contested, 29 pressure acts, 7 tackles. He's only gone at 61% disposal efficiency. There was a bit, I noticed half the people saying he was excellent and had him in the votes, and half the people were calling for his head. So, George, I seem to see where you are lying in this. So,
It was a bit of a game. It was a bit of this and a bit of that from Harms, wasn't it? The quality wasn't there that he should have had as a result of 31 possessions. His kicking and decision making still leaves a lot to be desired. We'll forgive him there for this round, simply because it was his first game back after, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks out. He's not a Jack Viney, so there's a step down in that sense. He got most of his possessions around the ground, which is good. He's the one that probably gave us that stoppage differential superiority, but he really has a long way to improve his game. We're just got to wait and see. Look, we're not going to complain about 31 possessions, but there are a couple of times where it just needed that little bit of polish, and against better, against probably better sides in that sense. That's what you really need when you get to finals situations. You can't afford to have those sort of mistakes that he was making in this game. But let's see what he does next week.
man, anything to add on Harms?
Yeah, I mentioned at the top that I got a couple of things wrong. One was to underestimate Swans, and as again, they were terrific. The other one was I was all for Swallow over Harms. I thought he wasn't very impressive, as I said last week in the Casey North Melbourne game. So I was definitely hoping they would go with Sparrow. What am I? Number 32. Jesus, unbelievable.
I'm never sure whether you're joking or.
Well, I'm not. It's like my Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley. That's it there. I'm sorry. All listeners, I'll just number 32. I was expecting him to come in, but wow, you wouldn't believe it. The selectors have. I'm wrong, and the people paid to do the job for a living are right. I thought he was terrific. I agree with George's comments about his decision making and makes mistakes, and I don't think he's the most he's not the most natural position, thinker on the ground, if that makes sense. But he was a really good decision to bring in and important because partly because of how well Swans played and how physical they were. His sort of strength and his, he's up around the 100 game mark as well. I presume maybe over, was important in the heat of battle. I thought he did well in the centre. I was really surprised that he didn't tag anyone. He didn't tag Parker. I thought he might tag Parker or Kennedy, which was why they brought him into the side. But I don't know whether either of you picked up that he did, but I'm pretty sure they didn't run anyone with anyone except for May directly on Buddy. I think
Jordan was on Mills for a while, but there really wasn't anything else.
And Hibbert played pretty tight on Papley too, I think. But yeah, I thought he was terrific. He dropped an absolute clanger right in front of me, that pass from Gorney. But I thought his physical presence was really important in a game that we were missing Viney, which was a really good point by what he is saying. And I think that Swallow wouldn't have provided that physical presence. Sparrow wouldn't have provided that physical. Number 32 wouldn't have provided that physical presence. So, what's his first name? I'll have to just call him that. So that Harms did. So yeah, good call by the selectors, and he certainly earned his spot. He'll obviously get selected this week, you'd assume. And yeah, it'd be interesting though when Viney does come back, whether where he goes, whether Terence Langley asked about who makes way for him. I'm not sure what the answer is because and who goes into the centre when Viney's back, which sounds like it might still be 2 or 3 weeks away. But does Harms play as a mid? And we pretty much have come to the conclusion, and we don't want him playing as a halfback flank. But if not there, I'm not sure where.
D. Zephyr in the chat room has said that he's in the excellent camp for Harms. It was a very slippery night, and Oliver went at 66%. And it was slippery. You saw Stephen May dropped an absolute sitter. Harms dropped that sitter. But, yeah, I mean, it's going to have an effect. Let's move on. James Jordan. He's had a remarkable first half. He had 11 touches in the first quarter, 17 to half time. Dropped off a little bit in the second half, finishing with 23 disposals, 8 tackles, including that game-saving tackle that denied the Swans, pretty much a last roll of the dice scenario. Also racked up our second Rising Star nomination in a row. So congratulations to him. Just sort of getting better and better. He's really... learning on the job and doing an excellent job. And I saw a stat this week that he has never been involved in a losing game for the D's. So well done to him.
He's a credit to the number 23 for us, isn't he? Even the other Jordans who wore number 23.
Almost as good as that other guy.
I've said it before, but he does play so much like Junior, doesn't he? Just the way he sort of accumulates possessions without you really sort of noticing. He ran out of gas a little bit, I thought, in the second half, and which is hardly surprising. And in fact, both teams ran out of gas. They must be a pretty fit team because they went with us right to the end, and I was pretty confident we'd kick away. Actually, when we got out to that 22-point mark after T-Mac kicked that miraculous goal from the boundary, I thought that we were going to break them, and I was super impressed with their ability to stay with us. But both teams were out on their feet, and including Jordan. Jordan, there was one chase that he gave up that he sort of, in the about 10 minutes to go, where you could see he just couldn't raise an effort to chase down the Swans player who ran away from him and moved it into the centre. So, which made his tackle came after that, the tackle that he laid near the end of the game, after that, even more impressive because he was clearly out on his feet. And that tackle was huge. Just the timing of it, and I loved the reaction from the MCC because it was on that wing. He just got a massive roar when he laid that tackle. He's a smart player, isn't he? He uses the ball well. He makes good decisions, unlike perhaps Harms. He makes sort of intuitively good decisions, and he seems to know where to be to get into the right spots. He's the very definition of a natural footballer, I reckon. And I heard discussion about him last year, and it's come as a super pleasant surprise to how good he is, because I had no sense that we had such a gun who by all accounts he would have been selected last year if not for a unfortunate gym injury. He really adds something, doesn't he?
Yeah, those 11 touches in the first quarter when he was playing against Mills was something really, really special. You don't expect that from basically a first-year player. We have been blessed with someone who is really, really talented. Let's hope his body holds up during the season so that we can see more of him.
Yeah, and I think Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Say that I reckon James Taylor's had more of his Taylor has had more of a good Lord. Jason Taylor.
First name blindness.
It's like Petty. So Tom Petty. No. Jason Taylor has had more. They've given him more reign, I think, to select who he wants and go after who he wants. And I feel like he's done a great job in the last 3 drafts targeting pure footballers, really good quality, good thinkers, not being focused on contested ball winners, not being focused on necessarily sort of a position as such. But when you think of players like Bowie, even Laurie apparently is a natural footballer. Definitely Jordan, Cozzy, we've talked about his footy IQ, Jackson as well. He seems to have had a real emphasis on those sorts of players. And arguably you could put Spargo into that category as well, who is another really natural footballer who's really coming into himself as a player now, built on a good foundation of good footy IQ. And I think we're seeing the dividends that we're getting, better kicks, better decision makers. The other one is Rivers. He's not only a natural footballer, but he's super competitive. All the young fellas are, and really good character. And Taylor deserves so much credit for the way we've gone about building this list.
I'm very excited to see the guys that we drafted this year or at the end of last year. And I think it's a good thing that we're playing well and we haven't needed to bring in any of those guys. We're allowing them to develop their craft in the twos, and they'll get their chance at some point this year. But I'm really excited to see them because I've got absolute faith in Jason Taylor based on the last couple of years and who he's drafted. Particularly not we've got Jackson and Cozzy, but because of the guys like Sparrow, Jordan, that was on purpose, and even guys like Spargo when we didn't have, when we don't have in the top 10 or whatever. So, excited to see that. Let's move on to the last guy in the middle, Max Gawn. Despite his 42 hitouts. I didn't think Max had his usual impact on the game. Anyone could have seen that. The conditions, as we talked about, didn't suit a big man. Perhaps that goes a little way on explaining things. His main opponent, Tom Hickey, was able to get 6 clearances. We can usually rely on Max taking marks around the ground, and this week he could only manage 3. And it's now 2 weeks in a row that Max's influence on the contest has been minimal. Are there any concerns there? There's a few people on Demonland who think he might be carrying an injury. Then they haven't mentioned anything in the injury reports. Is there anything to worry about there, Binman?
I think, I think minimal is. I think the problem for Max is his excellence. I put on one of the threads around the sort of questioning him, his critique is that he's had the best 8 games of football I've ever seen at the Melbourne Football Club in a collective. Those games, the first 8 of this season, and that includes Robbie Flower. I've never seen anyone play at the level he has this season for the Melbourne Football Club. He's been phenomenal, and I think he's a bit of a victim of that level, because I'd completely disagree with his impact being minimal. It wasn't at the level it has been in the say the first 6 games. That's for sure. But he's still been incredibly influential. And when the game was needed to be won, he did an incredible. He's just such an incredible athlete, and he's gone. He's definitely improved his athleticism this year, and his mobility and his ball handling. He picked up. I was sitting in the southern stand, and I couldn't quite make out who it was at first because he was moving so smoothly. He picked the ball up in the forward, in their forward pocket, maybe 4 or 5 meters out from goal, and seemed to pick it up off the ground as like a midfielder. Kicked the ball. I'm pretty sure he hit a target. The ball tic-tacked up that outside, the outer wing, ended up going out for a boundary line throw in, which he won. And I can't recall whether he got a free or whether he grabbed it straight from the ruck, put it down Harms's throat with a lace-out kick. This is after running all the way down the ground. That ball went out of bounds because Harms dropped it out of bounds. From that ball, and he just tapped a brilliant palm down to a moving Oliver, who I think went to Salem, who set up the goal to Brown. It was just a phenomenal bit of football. And it was just after I'd said to the fellow, to my friend who I was watching the game with, he's a star. And that's in a game that's won by 9 points, that's influence right there. So he was involved in the scoring chain. He saved us down the other end. He was involved in the kick, then in the handball, the kick to Harms, then set up the goal. So, he's just, I think he's a phenomenon. And sure, he didn't have a great game. He looks tired, and it's not the way he plays the game and how hard and how often he gets smashed. And he gets hit in the head 4 or 5 times every game, and it's starting to really frustrate me no end. That he should be protected, so it's no surprise that he's going to have some matches that aren't at that really incredible elite level. But the other thing was, it was wet. It was again, if you were watching on telly, it would have been hard to see, but it rained at least 4 or 5 times during the game, and rained just before it started. So it was slippery the whole game. There was water on the surface, and it rained during the game, which is not ideal for any big man. So I think he's a bit of a victim of his own standards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just sort of alluding to the fact we usually see him take a lot of marks into fence, down the line, from kickouts, and we just didn't see that. But the conditions certainly did not suit him. You want to add anything, George?
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget who we played in the last couple of weeks from Max's perspective. He played against Nankervis, followed up by Goldstein, and both those ruckmen are very, very physical. I think the only other one in the competition would be Mumford, who would be equally physical. And when you've got those sort of guys hitting you time and time again, as well as being dumped, particularly I think it was in the North Melbourne game, he was targeted behind play a lot. It just takes a physical toll on you. Hickey's become another one of those sort of players. Hasn't got a great deal of skill, but manages just to jump into people all the time. The majority of Hickey's clearances actually came, I think, when Jackson was in the ruck. So I don't think Max lost out in that sense. But it's easy to just forget how sore and tired you can be after having come up against probably the 2 other best ruckmen in the competition in the previous fortnight.
And what do we see makes the point that he's played a bit more as a defender since Tomlinson's gone down. So, that takes him, makes him into a defensive player rather than an offensive threat up forward, which perhaps changes the perception a bit on how he's going.
I was going to bring up before when you were talking about some of the younger guys, B-Man, are we likely to sort of rest a couple of these younger players as we go along? It's a long season. We want bodies fit and ready, or do we just each week pick the best available team?
Me? Sorry, Andy, you asking?
Yeah, yeah, just a general question. You can take that.
Yeah, well, look, my view is I reckon I said a few weeks ago, in fact, 2 weeks ago, that we should be all out, all chips in on winning these first 10 games. And now we've won two of them, so we've got two more to go. Carlton, I think, are a huge threat, easily could beat us. So, it's the game actually of, more than the Swans I'm nervous about in that first 10 games. If we can win these next two games and we'll go to 10 zip, we'll only in quotation marks need to go 50 percent after that. We'll have 12 more games. 15 to 16 games will get you in. So we'll need 6 of 12. Will easily get us in. 5 of 12. We can go under 50%.
But are you talking about getting in
Into top
straight
four, I should say.
top
Top
four?
four. Yeah.
I mean, the position
Sorry.
we're in,
Apologies.
now has to be top four, and then I
Right,
get
exactly. So
top
everything should be about
after
top
that.
four. You don't win a grand final, as I said. Leaving aside the dogs exception, that's exception that proves the rule. Got to be top four, top two, even to thing to be thinking
The
about.
home
We get a
final.
home final, which could be huge if it means that we avoid playing a Brisbane or a Port Adelaide, and that's what they need to be thinking about. We lock in 10 wins, that will go pretty much lock in a top four position. So that I hope that they just go all out, no resting players. They pick their best team possible for the next 2 weeks, unless there's players who genuinely need to be managed for whatever reason, not injury, but like they're just they're peaked and they need that rest. And then I hope that they use the bye period. So after round 10, from about round 11 to round 14 with a bye in the middle, they plan around that, and they give anyone who needs a chop out. As you say, the young players, not Cozzy, because Cozzy is the sort of player who just hate getting, not playing. But Rivers, who probably might need a rest. Jordan, not the same player not three or four players, one or two players a week. Give Jordan a chop out, give Jackson a chop out. Give them all a bit of a spell. Maybe give Gorn a go and bring Dore in. And even if that means not having our best team on the park for the Lions, Port, and Dogs game, I reckon that's okay, because none of those games, if we win these first 10, none of them will be critical to finishing top four. And even if we lose one or two of them, the opposition will know that we haven't put our best team on the park, and we'll know that as well. So it's not as if psychologically they're going to have something over us. And really from now that's the opportunity we've got, but we need to win the next two. And then it's following the Richmond model. Richmond have been phenomenally good in their premiership winning years of, the whole idea of 2 seasons, playing your home and away season, making top four, locking that position in, and then starting again, having another season. It's about getting there, not it's not where you are at the end of, you want to be top four, but it's not how many wins you get in the home and away, it's how many flags you get. So, I think that's what I'm hoping they'll do. We'll see this week, I guess.
Just talking about, just a sidestep, talking about the ladder and the positions where we're in at the moment. Have you boys found yourself in the last 2 weeks just opening the AFL app and going to the ladder and just staring at top spot? I know premierships aren't won in March, April, May, but it's sure been nice to see us sitting there up on top.
What I find remarkable is we're not only sitting on top, but we are 4 games clear now on top to stay in the 8. It's just incredible that there's a group of probably four teams in the competition, and then the rest of them, apart from the bottom two, are busily beating each other. Meanwhile, we're winning games and just getting further and further ahead of the pack. It's something I'm not used to by any stretch, but we'll enjoy it.
Could either of you guys have imagined when the draw came out and we all looked at it and had a look at us, who we're playing in the first 8 weeks? We had St Kilda in there. We couldn't have imagined that they might have dropped off. So the St Kilda, Richmond, Geelong, Sydney, all would have been games we would have looked at and go, I'll be happy if maybe we win one of those four, win the others and perhaps be 5-3. That would have been fantastic, or 4-4. We would have probably taken even. But who could have imagined 8-zip?
Yeah.
Not me, that's for sure. I mean, I said at the beginning of the season, the first podcast, the first 4 games of the season are critical for us because we're playing, Geelong and GWS and teams around us that St Kilda being the other one, that will be competing for 6 to 8, that now we're not competing with St Kilda, we're not competing with GWS, we're competing with the big teams, aren't we? In terms of that top four has to be, and realistically, sounds like getting ahead of ourselves, but top 2 is what they really should be focused on, because that means that'll lock in a home final, which hugely increases the chances of a flag. So that's a long time away, but yeah. After that, I mean, it just shows too, Andy, I reckon, how critical banking wins against even a North and a Hawthorn and, this week, and then Crows. None of them should be taken lightly. We're not, we're nowhere near good enough to be taking any game lightly. And as we saw against the Roos, the team that's not won a game were 22 points up at halftime or 18 points up at halftime. So, they get the first goal of that third quarter and we're in genuine strife because, if you don't bring that pressure that we talked about, through the season thus far, you're not going to win games at AFL footy. So, yeah, 8-zip is just crazy good.
Let's go back to the game. Tom McDonald, we'll talk forwards now. What a turnaround in form from his output in 2020. From 9 games in 2020, he only took 29 marks. From his 8 games this year, he's already taken 52 marks. He's almost doubled his disposal output from 2020 in just one less match. He's kicked 4 goals in this match, including that bullocking burst through a pack of players. That snap, it was a beauty.
On his left.
On his left. He's had a beauty snap from the boundary that I told the guy next to me, not a chance he's going to kick that. And then that match-saving ripper pack mark. The only person not pleased with his output has got to be Sam Wiedemann.
Yeah, that's so funny, Andy, because the fella I was sitting next to, Ilbardo, I said to him before it, I said, I want to tell you now he's going to kick this. So when he does, it's like in snooker where you do the bank shot, you've called it, and he goes back and slots it. I'm saying, well, there we go. So
we are exact opposites. Our outlook on life.
Yeah. Well, on the D's at the very least.
Isn't it amazing that prior to the season we were thinking of trading him, and there was lots of questions about how does he possibly fit into a forward line. Well, now the question is, how do you not put him into the forward line? It's completely changed our views of him. I think one of the important things that's easy to forget is he had that foot injury from end of 2018, I think it was. So 19 and 20. He couldn't jump off the ground. That's not what we're seeing now. So he's obviously overcome that. There are stories that he's come back super fit. I was listening to an interview with Petracca during the week, and he said that he's eating meat now.
He's on not just eating meat. He's on an all-meat diet.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that entails.
No, I don't either, and it's frightening to think about what it might be. But if it's working, keep eating meat. I thought it was funny that Petracca mentioned that the other forward in our team is only eating veggies, but
he's a vegan, so that's interesting.
Yeah, so we've got all bases covered up forward, but who cares? Who cares? We've got a very nice combination going at the moment. That pack mark in that last quarter of Tom's was as game saving as what Jordan's run down was. That kept us in it. Where otherwise we wouldn't have had even a sniff. It would have been 3 points with Sydney going plenty of time to come back. That was the winner for me. That was just fantastic.
That was absolutely brilliant. Like that he came from behind Brown, didn't he?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
to take it pretty much out of Brown's hands. It was his want for the football is amazing this season. And I mentioned at the beginning of the year he's sort of his body language is sometimes a bit scratchy, but that's not been the case for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And not only that, is that his energy on the ground is infectious. He just seems to be loving the game, and really, great around the other players. The players are feeding off that energy, and he just wants the ball. Like that mark was the perfect example. He just willed himself to take that mark, and we were struggling to take any marks inside our forward 50 last year and in 2019, and now we've got two big players in Brown and McDonald. But it was amazing, and also that his ability just to so calmly go back and kick that. Surely, Andy, you must have expected him to kick that one from that. He's really good at those round the corner. I mean, he's kicking for goals been really
Yeah,
top shelf this season.
I've got no worries about him kicking for goal, even not those snap one around the body. He's as straight as an arrow kick for goal. It was just that one tight on the boundary. I thought that could have gone anywhere, but pleasantly surprised.
And I thought I would have. I'm not, as I've said, I'm not great on working out who's best player, but I would give him the 3 votes. I know Oliver was terrific, and you could make a case for May's effort on Buddy, but I thought he kept us in it in the first half. He got us going in the not kept us in it. I mean, we were on top, as I was saying before, but he was the player who was the difference maker. 4 goals in a relatively low-scoring game. He kicked that one from the boundary. He was energetic all game. He was competing hard. He was getting up and down the ground. I thought from go to woe he was excellent in every quarter. And as you said, George, that was by far, I mean, that was the critical moment of the match. We weren't going to lose the game after he did that. And it was on the back of a really sort of high pressure 4 or 5 minutes or more of footy. That last quarter was an intense quarter of footy. So he was fantastic. And who would have thought that, during the pre-season, draft period and in the pre-trade period, Brown, who was delisted from North Melbourne, a team that's not won a game of football this season, and T-Mac, who we were shopping and no one would pick up, would both be starring and kicking 7 goals between them in a winning performance against the team that was 5th on the ladder but below us. So awesome. I thought during the game that he needs a movie, like one of those 70s movies, like The Resurrection of Tom McDonald or something like that, because it's what a comeback.
And he's had 18 possessions as well. So for a forward, that's fantastic.
I think I'm right in thinking that one of the commentators suggested possibly all-Australian form. How would that be?
Yeah, look, if he keeps taking marks and kicking goals, and I'm sure he'll continue on that, he's got to be in the conversation. They're SEN to a rolling all-Australian team, and there's about 5, 6, 7 Melbourne players in it, including Goody as the coach at the moment. So you're travelling well when you've got so many players in there. Coaches' votes as well. We've got, I think, 4 players in the top 10 or 15. It's remarkable. No other team's got that many contributors in those things. But we'll talk Ben Brown. He's played his first game for the D's on the hallowed turf of the MCG. I thought it was a very admirable contribution and everything we needed from Brown. It was slippery conditions, 6 marks and 3 goals in those conditions. And he was double teamed a few times once again. So yeah, I liked his performance, George.
Loved it as well, Andy. Loved it. It's been a long time since we've had a genuine jumping type of marking forward when he's 200 or 201 centimetres. When he jumps off the ground as well, nobody can get the ball. It's just going to make our mids look fantastic and the people delivering the ball up the ground look fantastic, because he'll take marks that ordinarily we wouldn't have been able to in the past. The opposition just can't match him when he's paired with someone like McDonald as well. It's just going to be a nightmare for them. He kicks brilliantly from his long run up. We better get used to it. I don't care what he does with it. when he does that, because he just kicks it straight as an arrow through the middle each time. Again, it's nice to have a forward who is so consistent, and that's what this whole team's of 2021 is all about, isn't it? I think it was interesting at North Melbourne. He basically had to do it all on his own. Now he's got a partner in crime in T-Mac. And if you have a look at Access All Areas, that's on the AFL site, they show some vision behind the goal of Brown and McDonald working together. It's really impressive. One goes out, one comes in, one goes around the side. It's really interesting watching the work that those two have got going on together. It's just going to create an absolute nightmare for opposition defenders when these two are working as a team.
Yeah, I can't wait till he gets a dry game at the MCG as well,
Yeah.
where the slippery conditions aren't a factor for marking, because he'll just mark everything. Big man.
Yeah, everything George said, spot on. I think, thinking about that game plan and what I was talking about in terms of territory, but how important deep kicks inside 50 are for us in the way we play. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the how often we go to the pocket, and that's the same thing. You want to get it to the pocket because you've got, if you don't mark it, it hits the ground. You can force a ball up and you can start again. You can bring your Gawns in, but you can also bring your Tom McDonalds and your Browns to ruck from that deep forward pocket as well. And it just means that when you can get that deep kick in, sort of to 30 metres out from goal, you've got Brown who, if he, as George says, with his height and his reach, if he doesn't mark it, it's going to come to ground. And then you bring your Cozies and etc. and your Spargos into the game. The other thing about George, you make a good point about his height and how difficult he's going to be if he gets one-on-ones. If you get players like Salem kicking into him who have got the ability to weight the ball into space properly and kick it to a forward's advantage, he's going to take a lot of marks in packs and one-on-one, because just like the goal that he did kick that I mentioned before that Maxi set up from the throw-in, from the boundary line throw-in, that was a perfect kick to his position, and he was always going to mark it. He was in the perfect position to get it, and did. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of someone who's going to kick most of his set shots. It's incredibly important. He kicks it dead straight. It takes a fair while to get there. So I think it's interesting. I'm also looking forward to when he plays in the dry at the G. But it definitely, as we were saying last week, is he's going to be love the open spaces of the MCG and the leading lanes and just the space to move around, because he is pretty sort of one-tracked, isn't he, in tram tracks, and he's not the most he's less athletic in some respects than Gorney, despite being fair bit shorter. But that was impressive. 7 goals from those two players is pretty good on a slippery night.
3 talls. I guess this will come up a fair bit throughout the year, and we've probably discussed this ad nauseum already, but is there a case for playing the 3 talls? I watched Friday night's match between the Cats and the Tigers, and the Cats would have been very pleased with the output from Cameron Hawkins and Rowan with 6, 4 and 5 goals respectively. I know Rowan might not be classified as a tall. He's actually the same height as Fritsch. To me, seems like he plays taller, or he's a bit bigger because he's a lot bigger than Fritsch is in terms of muscle and stuff. Is there a case for Wiedemann, or is Wiedemann just going to have to wait out an injury or poor form to one of the two bigs? George?
I think our 3 talls at the moment are our third tall is the resting Jackson or Gawn. I don't think we need a third player specifically. Like I said, if you have a look at this access all area vision, you can see how well Brown and T-Mac work together. You don't need another third one in there interfering with those sort of really efficient patterns. So when you've got Gawn and Jackson who go down there and provide another threat, that I think that's all that you need. You don't need to overload with an additional tall in there. Wiedemann will have to just wait his chance, wait his opportunity. From week to week, we don't know what will happen. Suddenly, someone gets an injury, and the opportunities will come. Let's hope it doesn't. But a couple of weeks ago, we thought Jack Viney was going to be lasting the whole season. All of a sudden, something happens like that. Somebody breaks a wrist, somebody gets a finger broken, or some other minor ailment. So all that Wiedemann can do is keep kicking goals at Casey. He didn't have an opportunity this week since the match was postponed. But it's also, you have to remember that Wiedemann's come back from a long break out of it. He's only kicked 7 goals against a nothing team completely and 2 goals in his previous game. He's got to put some runs on the board, so to speak, before he can justify coming in, as far as I'm concerned.
And I guess, we've also got Fritsch there. Look, he didn't really get a look in this week, and I guess we can talk about him now. I just brought up the Geelong thing because I saw a thing that since Jeremy Cameron came back in, he's kicked 12 goals in 3 games, and Tom Hawkins and Rowan have kicked 8 goals in the same 3 games, so that's 28 goals between the 3 of them. I guess when you look at Fritsch's output, besides this week, he's been kicking goals as well, so perhaps we'll get that 3-pronged attack with Fritsch and Macca and Ben Brown. So, but Fritsch this week didn't look anywhere near it this week. I don't know if it was the conditions. I don't know if he's still suffering from the hand injury. I guess from last week, 6 goals. We would have thought he was over that, but I don't know. How'd you see his game, B-Man?
I thought, as I said, the Swans played great, but you could not be impressed with the coaching of Longmire because it was clever the way he went about it. I think that they did go back to a style. I think that teams that try to play fast against us are going to struggle because it's hard for them to score. So it was important for them to reduce the total score in that game. The faster it goes, the more we're going to rebound, I think. So I was surprised, though, that they didn't play quicker, but maybe the conditions and looked to play on more. They, exactly as George said, they sort of played the way they historically have done under Longmire. But what he's always done well, and he did in this match, is he really got his matchups right, and they put a bit of time into Fritter, and I can't recall who they ran on him. George, you might remember. But they locked down Fritter pretty hard. They locked down Cozzy. Lever had Sinclair and Haywood basically sort of rotating off him and really looked to limit Lever's impact. Lever only had 1 intercept mark, and that was late in the last quarter. They looked to try to avoid playing through Lever as well. And I think they targeted Fritter as an important key to our team, and particularly around our scoring chances, because he is that classic leading player. I think, as George noted, they clogged up our back half and flooded back, and he struggled to find space. And he was well beaten, but I think that was a function of some pretty good coaching, perhaps. Maybe a down week after the previous week, but last week George made the point about him getting off the chain and kicking 6 goals. That at least part of that credit must go to Brown and McDonald and the games they played and bringing him into it. Perhaps the same is true a bit of the 7 goals that Brown and McDonald kicked this week. That you focus on stopping a Cozzy and Fritter, where you can only stop so many players. So for me, that's a good sign of you take Fritter. I don't think Cozzy kicked a goal, did he? No, so you got no goals from either of them, where we got 8 or 9 the previous week, but you got 7 from your 2 tall forwards on a wet night. So, he was quiet, but maybe he played a role outside of that wasn't so evident.
The other thing was that this was the first time that Fritter's actually played the third tall. T-Mac was dragged down to the back line in the game against North Melbourne, and that was Ben Brown's first game. So it's a complete in previous games, Fritter's been almost the first or the second go-to option up in the forward line, and he's had plenty of space in which to operate. So it's probably been very difficult for him to play the same style of game in this game against the Swans as what he had been playing previously. But he'll have to adapt to that, because I suspect the Brown and the McDonald tag team combination is going to be around for a while.
Yeah, and a related point to that, George, a few commentators or a few people in the media made a really good point. A number of them made the same point, that if you look at how we've won, we've won in different ways. We've won with playing different ways and responding to teams who have looked to play differently. And I thought it was interesting because I think it was Dee Spencer made the point that North Melbourne also looked to lock down or shut Lever out of the game. Definitely the Swans did in this game. And I was wondering when teams would start targeting Lever because of his importance to the way we like to rebound off half-back flank. And that's where we're at the moment, whether we've become the hunted. So teams are going to look to see what we're doing and minimise our strengths. And I think it's a real positive that we've been able to find other winners on the day or ways around it. Lever wasn't as influential, but as we've talked about a number of times, it's all very well and good sending a Haywood and a Sinclair to putting a defensive forward on a defender, but then you're basically giving up a player in your forward line at that. So, I think that goes back to that theme of selflessness that's really been strong whenever you hear any of the players talk about everyone doing their role and being selfless. And if Frid is shut out for the game, someone else has got to stand up. And so far, that's been a real theme, and that's what's happened in most of the games.
Lever took a great mark in the end as well.
I think that was his one intercept mark, and it was a telling mark, wasn't it? It was really important.
Stephen May, you can argue that Buddy is past his prime, but even if that's true, you can't just play any Joe Schmo on him. And if you play Stephen May on him, you're going to get the following result. And Buddy was restricted to 6 disposals, 3 marks, 0 goals, 0 score involvements. According to Demon Jack on Demonland, this was only the 5th time Buddy has been held scoreless in his entire career. I haven't looked that up, but I sort of find that hard to believe. But I don't know. Do you guys know anything about that?
I think that's correct. I heard the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. Buddy is beyond his best that we've saw in many, many years. Stephen May is actually the perfect opposition player to put on him. Buddy doesn't jump off the ground, and he's rarely gets an overhead mark. All his previous successes come from leading, bullocking, and pushing people off with his strength and with his running power. He's not running anywhere near like he used to. I suspect his foot injury and other leg injuries that he's had in the recent couple of years have taken their toll. He can't push Stephen May aside. I think it was a GWS game in Sydney. I think he kicked 5 goals in that game, but it was all from just pushing people off. So with Stephen May around, you're not going to be pushing him over. I think the other telling thing for Buddy is he had a free kick that was on their 50-metre arc, and he tried to pass it off. Now, normally he would kick 65 metres quite easily from a set shot. He didn't even try to go for the goals. The best is beyond him, but Stephen May did an absolutely first-class job on him. So we're very pleased we've got Stephen May.
And that takes a big weapon away from him. Another one, George, he did go for it from the 50-metre line and it fell short. And that really, as I say, takes a big weapon out of his armoury, because his ability to kick those bombs from outside 60, when particularly you'd think now that the player has to remain stationary on the mark, and that presumably that means he can really get his arc going and run around them and get the distance. I think that was telling in both those examples. One, that he didn't look to shoot, and when he did make the distance, it does make him much less damaging.
George, you had highlighted for me a few players you wanted to talk about. I haven't done any extensive notes on them, so I'll let you fire away with them. Before I do that, if you do want to join us on the show, 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. Jump in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. Melksham.
Yeah, Melcham once again. 0 tackles inside 50. He's playing as a forward. With Fritsch not contributing in that area as well, we're not going to get away with this for too many more weeks. He's got to start doing some work in there that was completely missing in 2020, and he's going back to the same old form. Tellingly, there are a couple of points in the game. He got an absolute Dazzle Davey picked this one up. He got an absolute bollocking from Ben Brown when the Petracca goal was kicked. Ben was leading out and on his own, and Tom McDonald had two players double teaming him right back along the goal line, and Melcham running freely into the 50 kicked it to Tom McDonald. Apparently Ben Brown went off his tree about that, rightly so. The other critical one that I saw was just before three-quarter time. I don't know who the Sydney player was kicking for goal from just on the 50-metre mark. Melcham and Lloyd were standing outside at around about 60 metres alongside, and Melcham stood still while Lloyd walked into about the 35-metre mark, took the mark and promptly kicked the goal. So I'm pretty sure that he got an absolute bollocking again from the coaches at three-quarter time. He's got to do more than that. He just can't afford to be standing around looking at what's going on around him and depending on getting a few cheap kicks out the back. That it impresses everybody, but he's not contributing to what is now a team performance. So I don't know how he keeps his spot in the side from week to week, but he does somehow.
Almost took mark of the year.
Yeah, almost.
Well, probably wouldn't have got it anyway because of the Richmond fella. Bin Man?
Yeah, I watched his vision last week from the North game, and he was much better than I had thought he was. He was really good actually in the North game, and he was involved in a lot of the scoring chains. And I'll watch, when I say watch his vision, AFL Pro Vision on the AFL.com site.
I'll just stop you there. It's Stats Pro.
Stats Pro, AFL Stats Pro, yeah.
And a few people messaged me asking, where's this provision you've been talking about? So
AFL Stats Pro. So if you go to the stats on the AFL website, the stats button, and when you click on that, one of the options is the Stats Pro. Yep, sorry about that. So I'll watch him again this week. I'm really trying hard not to sort of allow, my perception of his performance last year and his, or in particular, his lack of tackling and pressure. Really, that's really the main thing. And I guess by extension, his leadership to colour my thinking about him. I mean, he is a brilliant kick, but he was not this in a game where he needed to stand up because we had players down. He wasn't fantastic. It was. So Adonsky makes an interesting point about if Melksham came out, whether Harms might go forward and play, mid minutes, and I think that would actually be a really good option because if you remember when Harms first started, he played as a mid in those as a forward in his pre-season games that in his first season or his first season of playing. I can't remember if he played in his first year he was drafted. And he looked a natural forward, and he's got good hands. He can run at the ball. I could see him playing up forward. He's a pretty accurate kick. I reckon that's a really good spot for him because halfback flank isn't. I don't reckon there's space for him in the midfield as a full-time mid, but definitely as someone who does a good chunk of time in there, I think that's a really good call by Adonsky. I could see him replacing Melksham's role as that sort of mid-size half forward who is better defensively as well. That's the critical thing. And Terence Langley, who asks about makes a good point about Wiedemann. He's got to be tackling and putting pressure on because Brown isn't going to be able to be too much of that. And George, that's a damning stat on a night that's wet and slippery in a tough game of footy. They had 50. I could not believe it. They had. I think I'm right in saying they had. Maybe it was 35 tackles inside 50, but I've got a feeling it might have been 50.
No, it was 35 to 15.
35 inside 50 tackles.
Inside 50 tackles, yeah.
That is just phenomenal. And, I mean, it's incredible that, that I was floored when I heard that stat. 15 is not bad, but it's not enough. And when he's giving none, that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing I think is worthwhile, that Stats Pro vision is fantastic, but it doesn't show what players don't do.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've got to be careful. It can be a bit like the draft vision that we see of all these players. I've never seen a bad player in the draft.
Yeah,
in the lead up to
my 2 minutes of highlights are fantastic, George.
Yeah,
that is true. That is true, George. Although if you watch 4 or 5 of them, of those, the vision, it's every involvement. So don't watch the highlights. They go like for 2 minutes, but an average player's involvement will be 11 or 12 minutes. If you watch 3 or 4 of them, you see the same vision from different angles. So you can actually see you're running. But that's spot on. And I heard Lepage talk on the radio about, one of the things that Melbourne are doing that they aren't is exactly that point, is that watch what they're doing off the ball. They're defensive when the ball's not in their hands. That's when the difference. That's they're buying into the running that's required at this level when you don't have the footy. No one's going to pat you on the back. No one's going to see it at the ground. No one's going to cheer you, running for 40 metres and doing, seemingly doing nothing. But he made the point that level of all-team effort is absolutely fundamental to success. And he went further to say that was the core reason Richmond went from a sort of an also-ran team to the elite team they are, that all-team buy-in in the running and defence when they don't have the footy. So, it's hard to see, and it's exactly your point. It's hard to see an absence of something, isn't it? So, I'll watch the vision and I'll hold fire on Melksham because, I don't want to sort of go too strong on it, but it wasn't a fantastic performance given the importance of that game.
We've got a caller on the line. Good evening. Welcome to the podcast. Who am I talking to?
Hi, Andy. This is Terence.
Terence, how are you going?
Good, thank you. Really great show, guys. So thank you for that. Gives me a really good break to my studies at the moment. So I had 3 questions. One of them, I'm probably a little ahead of where you guys are at the moment in the chat, but I wondered who you thought our bottom 6 were, because as I understand it, one of the signs of a really good side and perhaps our ability to get excited is being able to look to see who the bottom 6 were. And I did a rough one for the week just gone on Saturday. Melcham, Fritsch, but just for that day, Hunt, Brayshaw, Petty, Harms. I wondered if you guys had any thoughts about that, particularly when you consider some of the guys, we potentially might get in. Sparrow, number 32, Chandler, Lockhart, or Bedford, and the crop of the 2020 guys. Any thoughts? And I have one question after that, Andy.
Yeah, sure. That's actually good timing because the next 2 players we're going to talk about that George wanted to talk about were Brayshaw and Hunt. So, George, maybe you can start your bottom 6 and want to about any of those.
Bottom 6 is probably a little bit difficult to judge at the moment because while Binman's friend Sparrow is probably the only one who's really pushing from the Casey position, apart from any injuries. Sparrow will fit into a midfield role in some way. It's a case of who else is going to push someone else out. Viney's return might push a Harms, might push a Melcham out, but really there's no compelling cases for a lot of other players coming through. So it's really difficult to judge at the moment about the bottom 6. I think you might be pretty close with those ones that you mentioned. I wouldn't put Petty in there simply because he's going to be there for the rest of the season. At the moment, there's no one else at Casey who could possibly fill the back role in the same way that he can. So if he stays fit, he will stay in the side for the rest of the season.
Yeah, no,
Probably understanding of what the bottom six is. Sorry, Binman. I was just thinking in terms of, if this is our bottom six, I think I've got a lot to be excited about. If I'm including Brayshaw and Petty, Harms, Hunt, Fritz in there, Melcham to a lesser degree. So it was more in that context, George.
yeah, I'd say not the six that it might go out, for instance, the six that are sort of, in terms of their relative, I guess, ability or where they're standing in the team. I think it's a really good question because it's said, the point is made often about Richmond that the fact that they're so successful is built around the fact that, yes, they've got some stars, but it's pointed out all the time that it's actually those bottom six that make or break the really good teams. It's the players who can come in and do their role to a high level. And, one of the things that people are now saying about Richmond is that their successes mean your players like Ellis, who would fit that category, have now left the club for good, to get a better paycheck. They've done their time, won their premierships. You take those sorts of players out. Butler is another one. There's two or three. The other Markov that's gone to the Suns. They're the sort of bottom six players that they've lost, and now that they need players to come in, they're struggling with their depth. So I think it's a really good question. It's a really good sort of measure of where we're at, that those are the players that you selected, Brayshaw being one of them. He'd probably be asked to be put in that sort of category.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to tell him, right?
Yeah, he's got his. You might bring it up on his podcast with Gorney, but I think it's a really good point, and it goes also to that sort of. I think the structure is talked a lot about Richmond, and same with us. We've built that identifiable brand, and part of that is that you have players who know what their role is when they come into the side. I think it's really, to be honest, is completely overhyped, this idea that soldier in, soldier out, soldier in. It's a nonsense. If you lose a Gawn, you're not replacing him. Majak Daw is not going to be replacing Max Gawn in terms of what, it's not a like for like. But if you lose a Harms, then a Swallow is a like for like, and
Sparrow.
For good Lord, for Sparrow, if that is a like for like, or a Chandler can come in for a Jets, or so I think it's a really good point, and you've got total team buy-in then, and you've got pressure on spots, and that you can come in and rely on the system to make sure that it doesn't sort of weaken from week to week.
Exactly. Well, sitting here in Belgium, I don't get to see the roles that they're playing, so I'm a bit cautious about the six that I named because, as I say, I can't see all of the roles. And one of the visions that we did get over the weekend was from King, who I have moments when he's good, moments when he's not. But when he showed that vision on first
crack, yeah,
first crack
yeah.
of all of our guys just going back into the fence, I thought, my God, I wish I was there to see that. Mind you, I wouldn't have been smart enough to pick it up, but I mean, that was pretty amazing. The other question that I had, Andy, was about Bailey Fritsch. So, I mean, he's been terrific, and I'm going to give him a pass, or what do they say, mulligan or something for Saturday. But I've heard a little bit of criticism about the fact that he doesn't tackle. I guess if I'd had a wrist injury, I wouldn't be tackling either, but he doesn't really tackle and he's a little bit selfish. Do we have any thoughts about that? And do we have room, for that kind of play versus the all-in team effort?
Boys, anyone want to take that? I'm just having a look to see if he did tackle this week or not.
Zero.
I think that's been a reasonable criticism of him. He's been better this year with his pressure. There's no question about that. I think last year he was poor. We had Melksham, Wiedemann and Fritsch all in the last third of the season where their pressure was poor. I think what the pressure needs to be somewhere or okay. I wouldn't say he's selfish. It's more that he's just not his go with the tackling. It's been better. And I don't think it's hard to know about how he was on Saturday night. The problem is that you can't carry 3 players doing that. So you can't really have Melksham having no tackles and Fritsch having no tackles in a forward line. And you can't therefore bring in a Wiedemann who's not going to tackle either, or Ben Brown for that matter. Then you get a problem. And then you get, instead of 15 tackles inside 50, we should be getting 20. And you'll always get your Spargos and your Cozies and your AMBs. They'll get their inside 50 tackles. The extra that get you into a crazy number like 35 is your Melkshams and your Fritches and your Brown. So for me, Terence, I'd be saying that it's okay. He's playing his role. I think that his pressure game's not really his go, but he's been much better in that space. But you can't afford to carry more than one player like that, I reckon, in across the team almost, or at least certainly not in the forward line.
For me, if he's kicking 6 goals or he's kicking 3, I'm not as concerned about that. A Nibbler, if he's getting 0 tackles and not kicking a goal, I'm concerned. Fritsch this week, all right, he didn't have a great game. I can pass him for this week. Just looking at his stats, this year he's had 13 tackles from the 7 games that he's been at. Where am I? Yeah, 13 tackles from the 7 games. Last year, from 16 games, he only had 17 tackles.
Yeah,
that's one a game.
Yeah.
Whereas in 2018, he's had 59 from the 23 games. Look, for me, his role is to kick goals, take marks, kick goals, and that's my main concern for him. For someone like Nibbler or Spargo or Melksham, I'm wanting more defensive pressure, but I can give Bailey a bit of a pass on that.
And to be fair to him too, in terms of pressure, he provides great aerial pressure. So for a fella his size, he's great overhead, and he's really good at being in aerial contests. And if he doesn't mark it, bringing to the ground. So he gets good points in that space for aerial pressure. Whereas, again, if you compare him to Melksham doesn't get points much in that space. So I think that. His pressure, I'd say, is okay, Terence. It's and he's a pretty important part of that way we set up and play.
Yeah, no question. Well, thank you. I appreciate the insight. Andy, just a fun question. Is the last 3 numbers of the telephone number 666? Did you have to buy that, given that it's the devil's number?
You betcha. That's a Skype phone number. You can get numbers on Skype, and when you sort of go through their thing, it gives you a whole list of numbers, and that just happened to be one of them. And as soon as I saw the 666 at the end, I took it straight away.
I'm very proud of you. Well done. All right, guys. Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm going to go now. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Terence. Always great hearing from our listeners. If you do want to call 03 9016 3666 9016 3666, or join us in the chat room, as Terence is in there as well. So, we love hearing from other voices. So, give us a call. Is there anything, George, you wanted to add on? You mentioned Brayshaw and Hunt. Kicking wasn't great this week.
Yeah, nothing in particular. It was just that I was surprised how we had so many players who weren't obviously at their best. That Brayshaw's kicking looked pretty ordinary. Hunt, apart from one run through the middle, I don't know that he was sort of played the game. Melksham we've spoken about. Fritsch we've spoken about. So I suppose it's comforting that we've got a number of players who were well down below what I would have thought they were capable of, and we still won the game. So it was just highlighting that when you've got 4 players in a team of 22 on the day, that's a sizable component missing from their best.
Yeah, and I reckon part of that, at least, George, is down to the smart tactical coaching from Longmire. He really went to town on some of our players, and so shutting Cozzy out of the game. He didn't have a good game either. It was probably his flattest game, but he was they tagged him pretty hard. Lever's influence, it wasn't nearly as influential as he has been. So I think they put a lot of work into how we played. And I thought it was really interesting that they didn't play. They played really differently against the Tigers. We're, as I've pointed out, we're a similar team tactically. We play a similar territory game, but they played a completely different approach against the Tigers. They just opened them up. They did what Geelong did to them. They looked in the second half. They looked to move the ball quick. They looked to spread the Tigers across the MCG. They looked to to go through the middle a lot with aggressive kicks through the corridor against the Tigers. And they beat the Tigers by 50 odd points, didn't they? They much like Geelong did. It was a very similar approach from a tactic perspective, but against us, they didn't do that. And I think part of that is that defensive structure that Melbourne have, they've got the best defence in the league. There's no question about that. And the challenge is, even when they did switch a few times, is we're so quick to move across and to stymie it. And I'm really pleased Terence highlighted that bit of vision that King talked about. So if anyone's got KO, it's really worth having a look. It's a show First Crack, which I've only watched it a couple of times, but on Sunday night he showed vision. Specifically, he touched on that point, but he showed Petty playing that deep full back role that it was highlighted a couple of times. That's what Oscar McDonald used to play, that same role. It's what Tomlinson's playing, where he's super deep, so he's inside out their 50 with the ball up the other end, and everyone's pushed forward, so all their forwards are pushed, leaving him, Petty, all by himself. And King's point was twofold. One, that Petty's come in. He's come straight in. It's his only second game of the season, but he fits straight into that system. And his system is to replace the role of the sweeper or of the fullback role, the anchor, whatever they call it, that Tomlinson played and Oscar McDonald before him. And then they rolled the vision, and that's what Terence was highlighting, is that they stopped it. So when that ball came up, it ended up they switched it and ended up getting to Buddy in about the centre of the ground, or just sort of forward of centre. He looked up. By that point, he had Petty in front of him. If he kicked it, he would have had to kick to Petty. He had to hold up, and then Melbourne just flooded back. So when they finally did, I think he passed it to the Papley on the half-forward line. When Papley looked up to kick inside 50, we had 8 players in a zone completely, or 9 it might have been, completely giving them nothing to kick to. We ended up turning that ball over, I think, and King shows that vision from behind the goal and highlights the Melbourne players. It was just super impressive, and I think that explains why maybe we didn't allow them. Maybe the Swans decided tactically to not to roll the dice and try to get through us that way. But our defensive structure means that teams find it very hard to transition. So Geelong, Power, and the Dogs, those teams love fast transition. Swans previously, the Swans were the highest scoring team up until this week. They're just teams are struggling to score against us, and a big part of that is how well we're collectively moving, and how it takes a lot of synergy between those players to do that, to move across as one wave. So yeah, super impressive, really interesting vision to see.
I had some audio to play for you, big man. I apologise. We were going to play it during the Stephen May discussion. I'll play it now. Is there anything I need to, before I cue it up, do you want to say about it, or play it?
I heard it. He was interviewed on ABC Radio, and it really caught my attention because it goes to the point about him playing on May, but it also picks up a little bit about the centre clearance issue, and in particular sort of how important pressure is. But what's fascinating about him is how he had to change how he approached playing Buddy during the game because of their centre clearance dominance.
Here we go.
Just off the top, we're talking about the centre clearance numbers last night. So despite all the positive things that are going on with Melbourne, it was an unusual number to see at the end of the game, 17-4 from centre breaks, which obviously put your area of the ground under a fair bit of pressure with the ball coming out like that from the middle of the ground. What do you put that down to last night?
Yeah, no, I certainly felt that for sure. Some weeks that's going to happen. Could be a breakdown, and I know Maxie and the boys will take that pretty personally and have a look at that during the week and try and rectify that, because that is the area of the ground. So I don't know. I don't know exactly. It was a wet, scrappy day. So having a dominant ruckman in those conditions sometimes cannot be that much of a positive, because you just don't know where the ball's going to go off the hand. But I was pleased that we were still able to. They were still able to put some pressure on coming out of the centre bounce, and it wasn't so much clean entries. But yeah, it is certainly a number that we need to fix. And I think Parker, as you said before, Parker and Kennedy have always played well against us. And yeah, I think it's just a really good midfield, the Sydney Swans.
It felt like a hard game to analyse, whether the numbers, when you look at it statistically, the tackle count was through the roof. As we said, the centre clearance numbers were a little odd. How do you sum it up, I guess, as a group when you look back on last night, I guess, when you analyse the game?
Yeah, no, look, there's a lot of positives. I felt like we weren't playing very well, but we were. Sydney were just putting on a lot of pressure. And, not every week is it going to be a clean, easy game. And, the Swans, no matter when you play them, they're always going to be tough. They've got a tough, honest midfield, like I said before, and it was a bit scrappy. But I think the most pleasing part is our maturity and able to adapt and adjust to the conditions and the environment. And even when we were challenged late, the composure and the cool heads around the ground. I think it was 3 points at one stage, and it didn't really feel like we went into our shells and got worried. It was a bit like, oh, hang on, we can still control this outcome if we stick to our process.
There you go.
Yeah, and he went on to say either before that or after that he started the game wanting to play in front of Buddy and take his space, but that with the ball coming out of the centre as often as it was, that he changed his setup and played him off the back shoulder with his with his finger in the back. So yeah, he's a really interesting. I really like his interviews. He's really honest, and he sort of doesn't speak in riddles, and he's terrific to listen to.
Hellbells in the chat room said, "Is Ben Matthews the Swans midfield coach? I wondered if they had such an advantage in the middle. Matthews would have known our movements," and that's Ben Matthews, who used to be our midfield coach. And I did notice before the game there was a guy in one of the Swans assistant coaches was going around to a few of our players, and they're all sort of giving him handshakes and hugs or whatever. So that was Matthews. So I'm pretty sure.
I think he is.
Yeah, he is. Because I looked it up. I looked it up online to see who their assistant coaches were, and it was Ben Matthews. So
no, but I mean, I think he is their midfield coach.
Yeah. Meaning he have good intel on how we operate, leading to perhaps some of the advantages they had in that area.
Just the last thing, Andy, I wanted to flag about or highlight about the game is I thought Petty was terrific, and a bit like that on Demonland, there was a split about how well Harms played. Lots of people felt Petty didn't play that well. I thought he had a terrific game and was robbed of two absolute what I thought were clear marks, and one cost a goal ultimately. He plays a little bit different. He's not going to be as strong as he is Tomlinson, so he's going to struggle to match up on a player like Hawkins just from a strength perspective. But he's going to take more intercept marks than Tomlinson. So, he's going to play the same role, but perhaps be a bit more of a intercept threat than Tomlinson was. And he's a really neat kick. So I'm really bullish about Petty. Think he's going to be a star. And ultimately, I don't think we're going to lose too much with Tomlinson being out. And that's totally no knock on Tomlinson. He was phenomenal this season. That's I guess how highly I rate Petty.
All right, let's talk changes for this week's upcoming match against the Blues. Can you see us wielding the axe? I don't think so. I don't think there's going to be a hell of a lot of changes. George?
No, I can't see any either, really, Andy. The VFL side didn't play this week, so nobody had the opportunity to put their case forward. There's nothing really obvious that hasn't been there in the last couple of weeks that needs a change. So I think our real concern is actually with this loss of a game at Casey is that we've got people like Sparrow and Chandler and even Jones not getting a run in their legs. Who will they have, for example, as the medical sub this week? But really, I can't see any changes. Let's hope Petracca's corky isn't as bad as what it looked like on Saturday.
God, it looked terrible, didn't it? I thought
Yeah.
I had my binoculars on him when it happened, and
Yeah.
I thought, good Lord, don't tell me, because the siren went directly afterwards, and it looked like one of those, incidents that was a knee, the way it happened, and he came across underneath him, and he went flying basically, and he was down for ages. So
Yeah.
my heart was in my mouth.
Yeah, I thought he had done his shoulder when he hit the ground. He hit it that hard, but it was because he'd taken the full brunt of someone's knee. But the injuries report from our number 2 in the conditioning staff today seemed to indicate that he would be okay. So let's keep the fingers crossed from that perspective. But no, I can't see any changes.
And that the week after, Andy, that he signed on for 7 years.
Yeah, so I was just about to bring that up as well. We can talk about that. Look, obviously, a guy like Petracca, we don't want to have hanging over our head, I guess, next year, all of next year. Will he sign? Will he go to Collingwood? Will he go to Carlton? Whatever. You don't want that. So I'm quite happy to lock him away.
Quite happy.
Very happy. Is there any concerns on the length of from either of you guys? Certainly not for me. I'm happy. Oh, look, we had to give him whatever he wanted. He probably didn't take as much money as he probably could have. Probably going to Collingwood or someone else, maybe.
3 things drove me slightly balmy this week. One was the criticism, or any criticism, of locking him for 7 years by people like Brad Johnson, who in the same breath would say, of course we'd lock in Bontempelli for 7 years if we had the chance. I mean, come on. Of course, for 900, that's a bargain.
Yeah.
Locking him in for 7 years, not to have this stress. It's just awesome. The other one is crowd numbers, is the bloody ridiculous thing of us getting criticised for our crowds when, the MCG Richmond Dogs game got only 45,000. That was a Tigers home game. And then 15,000 for the Hawks. They got 80,000 members, 15,000 people at the footy on perfect conditions. Give me a spell when we get criticised. It just drives me nuts. But back on track. I mean, it's just fantastic. He reminds me of Barassi in terms of, I never saw Barassi play, but the sort of both similar in the way that the vision I've seen in Barassi, but also he's a player you build a club around, a player who will attract other players to the club. 7 years at that money is just, I'd take it to the bank twice over.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, when former and current club presidents talk about culture and the coach talks about culture. This is the way that you build culture. You build confidence in your playing group and your club as a whole. He's prepared to sign up for the 7 years. We're prepared to give him the 7-year opportunity. He's not like Grundy. I can't remember how old Grundy was when he signed a 7-year deal, but to take him out far beyond his usable life. Petracca's going to play another 7 years quite easily.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem and certainly not a problem like the Buddy problem. He's, I think, got 2 more years to run on his contract, and he's already looking like he's at the end of it. So, but it's about the culture. Now all the other players in the side go, well, Track's committed.
Yeah.
Viney's committed. Gord's committed. Everyone's committed here. That's how you build the culture within the playing group.
Balaam, Levo, Oliver.
Yeah. And Andy, you mentioned a couple of games ago against Richmond, the 3 Cs and how well they played. And I know lots of Christians out there are very upset, a bit disappointed because the 3 Cs won't be parted after all.
Yeah, just amazing news. It was a great cue, great timing. The preview of the game, Carlton. I'm a little bit worried, and I don't know if I'm just worried because we've won 8. We're bound to lose one at some point, maybe not. Carlton sort of seeing a lot of their games. They sort of are involved in a lot of shootouts. So, they might, some of the games I've seen, they've scored 120 points or over 100 points, but they've also had the opposition team kick the same. And I just can't see them kicking a huge score against our defence. And conversely, if they're giving up so many goals in games, I can see us kicking a big score against them. But still, having said that, I'm very wary about Carlton. I would have liked them to have knocked off the Bulldogs, not just because it would have given us that 2-game buffer on the top, but it might have taken the wind out of their sails in wanting to knock off a big name team. George?
Yeah, Carlton's interesting, aren't they? They're a bit like us a couple of years ago. They've got all the quality talent there, but they're not playing as a team. The fact that they were that far ahead, there should be a CFCSS as well from their supporters for exactly this.
I know that for a fact.
For exactly the same reasons. They've seen this too many times where they've got control of the game and they just throw it away. I'm expecting a shootout because Carlton don't have a great defensive structure. They will try to kick goals to win the game, lots of them. But the fact that they could give away, I think it was 8 goals in the last quarter to the Dogs, some incredible number.
I think it was 7 or 8, including I think Bulldogs kicked the last 2 of the third.
Yeah.
And I read some stat that I think they won 12 or 13 straight clearances, the Dogs, from in that last quarter. Some crazy stat. They just, not only did they put the foot down, they did it from the centre, and it was the perfect sort of opposite, the importance of clean centre clearances. Well, they got heaps of them, and they were a soul-destroying loss, I reckon, if you're a Carlton fan.
It was interesting. In that period of time, Cripps seems to be seriously out of his best form. Apparently, he spent 7 minutes of the last quarter on the bench.
No, it started the third quarter on the bench, spent 7 minutes, and then ran out of pretty much all last quarter, but ran out of steam. I think that I'm pretty sure that's the case. And the sort of criticism was, you come out after half time, you're in front, you've got momentum, and you've got your skipper sitting on the bench for 7 or 8 minutes, and then with the rotations working out, you run him into the ground in the last quarter. It's interesting philosophically because Teague has said that we're going to play aggressively. If they score lots of goals, we'll score more. And it's almost the opposite approach to building a footy team than Roos and Goodwin, which is you build your defence first and everything goes from there. It's like saying, well, we'll build our offence first and then we'll bring the defence up behind it. But what's bizarre about that that's not a bad philosophy for a team that's beginning their journey up the ladder, but they recruited Williams. Is it Williams?
Williams and Sard.
Williams and Saab, but Williams is on some crazy amount. He's close to $1 million a year, I think, or $900,000 a year. He's given them nothing. He's got an ankle injury. You do that, and Sard as well. He'd probably be on good coin. You do that if you think you're going to be a top 8, almost top 4 team. So they should be well past, making a thing about, well, we'll bring our defense up later and we'll just score more. It just runs completely against the grain of how footy's been for decades. Defense in most sports wins finals. You still need to score, of course. So, but it worries me, this game, a lot, because if we don't bring the sort of level of pressure that is our minimum benchmark, and who knows what that benchmark, all the rank, it has about 7 different elements, that pressure meter, and perhaps when we do our mid-season statistical analysis and statistical discussion, Andy, someone can define exactly what that pressure meter is. But benchmark is up around 180, apparently 190. That's where clubs want to be at, and us is around 200. So if it's not up around there, and it's like it was against North, they could easily be 6 or 7 goals up at halftime. And even if we click into gear after second half, it'll be too late. Because unlike the Dogs, we'll burst where we'll kick 4 or 5 goals quickly, as we showed against, say, the Hawks and other teams. But we're nowhere near as lethal as what the Dogs can be. I thought the Dogs were going to win that, even when Carlton got 4 goals up. So I think you're right, Andy. Our defence is strong, but it all comes back to that pressure meter. If we can have that up high around the 200s for the whole match, Carlton won't be able to go with us. But if we drop off in any way, they're a good team, Carlton, and offensively they can put on goals, as they showed against the Dogs. They were lethal in terms of how quick they were moving the ball, and they've got some. McKay's a total gun, Wiedering's a total gun, but I think you hit the nail on the head, George. They're not a team, are they? They've got a bunch of good players who, when they're going and it's all going downhill, they can rattle it on. But when the wick got turned up, they just went missing.
And we've spoken about this from previous games, but Carlton, Adelaide and Collingwood are all mid to low teams on the ladder. These are the teams that we have to beat. You can expect much different outcomes when you're playing the Dogs or Port that we have in the future. And this game is again another one for, regardless of the fact that we're already won 8 in a row. This is one of the games that we need to win and should win, because if we're serious about playing finals, these are the teams that you beat.
Yeah, and Carlton are an old foe, aren't they? They've been around for a long time, so I hope at some point we'll click, and we will beat up on a team. And if they don't bring the corollary to what I was saying is it's all very well. That's predicated on them bringing their heat, which they did against the Dogs. They're fantastic in that first half, Carlton. But if they drop off because they're not, if they don't bring their heat and we do, we could easily, smash them. What do we sing makes a good point in the chat room about all the vision and media scrutiny, and it's great how much discussion there is about the Ds at the moment, that our game plan and tactics are exposed and teams will start to work us out. And obviously all the clubs have got their own vision and all of that stuff. And I think, he makes the point that all top teams have faced that, and wonders whether we're not, perhaps whether we're going to be easy to plan against. That discussion, a few people said during the week, King and a number of other people discussed that very point and asked the question, well, what are their weaknesses? What are the Demons' weaknesses? And if people are interested, there's Bartel has a show on RSN on Monday mornings. It's on the RSN podcast where they dissect the weekend's games, and he's asked that very question, and they spend about 20 minutes on the Ds dissecting our game plan. So it's like catnip for Ds fans. Highly recommend it. And he makes the point that we've got no weaknesses in terms of that defensive structure, that then the teams are going to struggle to score against us because our system is just so reliable and robust.
AMAC in the chat room says 9 of Carlton's 13 goals last week came from Harry McKay and Eddie Betts. May will take McKay, but who goes to Betts?
Yeah, that's a good question.
They normally would have Jeddah, but obviously they're not going to bring Jeddah in to play on Betts, and Jeddah, Best is probably past his best, but he's kicked goals, a lot of goals last week. So who goes to Betts of our current team?
I was going to say Hibbert, and I just see Hell's Bell in the chat room says Hibbert. He's done the job now on Martin, Papley. He'll monster. I think he'd be a great matchup for Betts. He'll monster him.
Or we could use Rivers and maybe even Hunt if needed.
Yeah, Rivers, but then Rivers plays deep and it take away his strength of half-back flank. And I don't actually think he's fantastic one-on-one defensively. I don't think he wants to be. I reckon he sees himself ultimately as a midfielder.
Weather, just had a look, 14 or 15 degrees with 25% chance of precipitation, max wind gusts 28 kilometres an hour. Let's just hope it doesn't rain.
Yes, I'm sick of the rain.
Yeah, love to see us on a dry day. Want to see that big Benny Brown take a nice lot of marks against the Blues. Kick a bag. Anything else, boys?
That's about all for me.
The only thing it was great going to the game on Saturday, and it was a different game of footy than what I expected. I really thought we'd crack them when we got the 4 goals up, and I fully expected us to kick away. And it was a like almost felt like an old-fashioned game of footy. The crowd was, as I said before, up and about. There was a really great energy. The MCC looked like it was rocking, and I just loved the fight. We didn't play our best game of footy in terms of skills, and we left a bit out there. I thought in the second quarter and third quarter we missed some big chances. Petracca in particular, I think there was Max hit the post. Brown didn't make the distance on one. We had a chance to really, I think Cozzy missed one. We had a chance to really put them to the sword and didn't, and then they stayed in that game. A good old-fashioned game of footy that I was thrilled to come out with the 4 points. So it was just a really terrific night to go, and it's just great that we're in this position. And one of the really great things is how much media there is about us, and how it's how often they're talking about us. Other clubs, other fans must be getting sick of it. It must be what Richmond fans get every year.
And it's nice to have the positive talk and not talking about when the coach is going to get sacked. So.
Yeah, how's the is Goodwin the right coach thread going on Demonland, Andy?
I think there's what do you call them, tumbleweeds rolling at the moment. I think so. So wait till we have a loss, and then I'm sure that'll get going again.
Yeah. You're going well as a club when the big talking point on a footy fan forum like Demonland is our centre clearance differential.
Yeah, that is. All right, boys. I think we're going to leave it there for the week. We'll be back next week, ready to dissect the game. Hopefully we're talking about 9-0. But at the start of the year, as I said, if you would have said we were 8-1 after 9 rounds, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. But let's keep this momentum going and roll as far as we can. Thank you to George, thank you Binman, and thank you to our caller Terence tonight. And we'll be back next week. Go D's.
Go Redlegs.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on.